Hi, good afternoon. My name's Jason, and I'm an artist, writer, and educator. I'm doing this to kind of create samples of virtual teaching, and I'm also doing this for practice to kind of teach myself by trial and error how to teach virtually and kind of play around with different software. So I've been an artist for about 15 years. I've worked in a lot of different nonprofit and local government settings. And I also was a glassblower for over 10 years. And now I primarily work in writing and drawing in the form of graphic novels. So what I'm going to show you today, and this is going to be mostly kid friendly, so probably say like 6th grade through 12th grade, also friendly for adults, is I'm just going to give you a big picture lesson on how you would self-publish and make a book, a graphic novel using words and pictures. I'm going to show you like the big picture with all the steps. So like this would be a lesson that would culminate from like a semester's worth of work or even a year, where this is like the big final project. But then all the little steps take like lots of time and you have to do it. So this is kind of like the big idea. So this is a book that I wrote in the last year. It's about documenting my time working as a disaster service worker in Los Angeles during the pandemic, and just documenting what I was seeing and hearing around Los Angeles during the pandemic. So this is the published version. I used a commercial printer. Everything is handwritten and hand-drawn, and then I'll put it into Photoshop, and I'll also use InDesign to compile it. As you can see, there's full bleed. So when you're thinking about creating a book, you have to think about something called bleed, which means you need to leave a border around the edge of your image that is going to get lost in the reproduction process. And it's kind of a little bit of a difficult thing to get your head around at first, because it's not like you're resizing something after the fact. You actually have to think about the design of it. So that's something I'm going to go to in depth, where I'm actually going to show you like the original and how the original is done, and then this is the final product. But first I'm going to go through some other stuff. So all the originals are done on 8.5 by 11 sheets of Bristol board that are hand torn. I'm going to show you the way to tear down paper that's 100%, or not 100%, but is a really accurate way to get 8.5 by 11 every single time. So this is just ink and pencil and gouache. This is emergency frontline workers, Nurse Brooke, Nurse Sati. These are just like people that I've met, the in and out guy at the drive-thru. My friend Al Ramos, director of Wabash Park, and also director of movies. Movie called Road Dogs with like Danny Trejo, Emilio Rivera, empty Hollywood Pool, the Hollywood Rec Center. So just to give you an idea, these are the originals, just ink and gouache. Weirdness in the Denny's parking lot. So everything's done on Bristol board. I'll just put these back so they're safe. I always keep the stuff in these cases that are A4 cases, and I get them at Daiso. So everything is stored relatively safely. And I just have like a stack of all of these. So pretty much all this book was me writing what I was seeing every day and then drawing images to go along with it. So this is stuff that I partly learned from my mentor in grad school, Linda Berry. It's also stuff I've sort of made up along the way too. I would encourage you, if you were planning to do like a self-diary type visual comics diary, to just kind of make up the rules as you go. This is another type of paper. It's Deleter manga paper. It's thinner than Bristol board. It's a lot cheaper, but it's pretty good. It reacts to ink pretty well. And part of why I'm doing this is to just practice being in front of like technology and virtual learning, and also have teaching samples from curriculum that I've been writing. This is a guy outside of Village Pizza, one of the best places to get pizza in LA, on Larchmont Boulevard. And this guy was playing the trumpet and an accordion while wearing a mask covering his nose and mouth. So that is pretty impressive because some people can't even do that walking down the street. So just documenting what I'm seeing around LA. I've seen this guy for years and years, bumping music and running around Los Angeles. So that's pretty much what the book is. And all right. So I'm going to put that away, and I'll show you some of the things that go into doing this. So these are all the originals. So this is Strathmore Bristol board, 24 sheets of 11 by 17, which actually comes out to 48 sheets of 8.5 by 11. So this is a pretty good bang for your buck. And you see I have paper already torn down, reference image. So I'm just gonna start by preparing paper. So I'm gonna rip piece out, put this to the side, and then I'm gonna take my sheet and I'm gonna line up the edges of the paper so it's edge to edge. So that's really important. You want to take your time with this, that you're making sure that all the corners line up. So corner to corner. And when you're folding something, the first thing I would suggest is don't commit right away. So right here I have room for error because I haven't committed to making this like completely creased. So I'm holding it like this, and I'm going to start to creep up on it. So making sure that the corners are still lined up. Then I'm going to crease it more. So now I have it pretty good, so I'm going to crease it more, and then I'm going to commit to it, and then you can go ahead and use like a bone folder or the back of a pen or a ruler or whatever, but finish your crease by doing that, and now it's really set in stone. But that's your line. And then go ahead and flip it over and fold it the other way, making sure that you're careful about lining up the corners again. So fold it again, and then just keep doing that over and over and over again. And this is a way better way than cutting it with scissors or with a razor blade. And that's great advantage. It really is. Or a paper cutter. If you were doing this in a printmaking studio, you'd have like a tear bar or like a break, which is just thicker than what I'm about to use, which is a ruler. So you want to put the ruler up on the line, and you want to make sure that you're firmly pressing down, and then you want to pull back and over the center of the ruler. So and what you get is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that has a rough torn edge, which I really like, so I leave it in there. I don't cut it off with a razor blade. It looks like almost like a print, so I think it's really beautiful, especially when you start to put like ink on it. But this will get you 8.5 by 11 pretty accurately every single time, which is really important to have your paper be exactly the same. So now you have an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. If you were using that Deleter comics paper I was talking about, it would have a bleed marked in non-photo blue printer ink that would disappear when it was photographed or scanned. But what you want to do is you want to think about a 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 inch in as being your bleed zone. And you can actually think about it like, so probably an inch in is the bleed zone, and on all sides. And then 1/2 inch in is the trim zone. So let's try this out. I'm playing around with all of this stuff right now. So here is InDesign. And you can see, let's see if this works. So you can see that there is lines in the InDesign document, and I'm trying to think, or trying to see about zooming in on this. So thanks for bearing with me. Part of this is just getting used to new technology, which is also something that I'll be teaching you in this sample lesson, is that, you know, the way to learn Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator and all these programming stuff. If I have, you know, sixth graders to high schoolers who are watching this, you probably already know a lot of that stuff, and you definitely know how to use like Twitch and Discord. But the best way to do this stuff is to just throw yourself into it and then ask questions about how to do what you're trying to do, because it's not something that you're going to like read like a book from cover to cover, which if you're you know, younger audience member, you're not doing that with learning information anyways. But that's one of the things I've noticed a lot with people who are older who ask me how I'm doing this stuff. They'll be like, well, what program did you use? And like, how did you do that? And like, there's no simple answer to that, because I'm not just like doing it on like an iPad where I'm using like one specific program. I'm using a lot of different things, how I want to use them to get the result that I want. So You can see in here if you see that there's the first line, inner line, that's red, that's the bleed zone. So everything within that zone is gonna be safe. And then I'll try this. You can see that outside of the zone there's like other lines. So this is the trim line, and then this is the end of the page, and then you can see that I'm extending way beyond the end of the page in InDesign. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I can, but also the thing that I would immediately kind of like caution you or just say this is what you should think about is when you're designing bleeds in print media, you're not doing it after the fact, although there's plenty of ways you can fix, designing a page after the fact, but it's not as good as considering everything from the beginning process. So here I did not consider having a bleed by making a margin that goes in an inch on all around. And I'll try and quickly find an example of something where I did do that. Although I think I mostly do that in Photoshop after the fact, where I'll like shrink the image down and like create a border. But what I did do in this is that I designed this image where I'm accounting for all of this area and the edges of the paper is not important. So if I cut off an inch up here, you're still going to get the idea of what it is. Like, it's not going to ruin the picture. If I cut off, see how this is like extending out? There's a lot of this caution fence in here, and it's extending out because I extended the image. So you see these lines, this caution in here, this is all an extension where I could crop it like that, but then I would have a problem. So for the cover of this book, this is what the final product looks like. So you can see, looks good. There's no major cropping, like cutting off the side of her face, and there's no text. Like, you don't want to cut off text ever, really. So there's no text being cut off. So let's go ahead and try and look at the InDesign file and give you an idea. So this is the InDesign file for the cover. So cover and then InDesign file. You can see how I extended a black background that's going beyond the edges of the actual image. And the reason I did that is that's actually a fix. That's a fix behind trying to format the image to fit within like the proper bleed settings on InDesign. You want to be really careful of distorting the image and dragging and even really resizing stuff in InDesign. At least that's how I kind of work with it, is I'll usually like resize something in Photoshop and then put it directly into InDesign to kind of mess around. So that's actually my fix, is having those black lines that are beyond the bleed anyways is essential to getting the image to come out like this. So I know that's probably pretty confusing, maybe, but what you want to think about is, when you draw something, if you're going to draw to the edge, don't put anything important on an inch on all sides. Or measure in a border, draw a frame, and keep everything an inch in. Or put it into Photoshop, resize it, and then you can not have an issue. So this is the original image scanned into Photoshop, and I scan it at the size it's at, 8.5 by 11. I try and do everything consistent. That's another thing to think about with doing this stuff, and this is kind of a design thing. Every little thing you do culminates towards the end of your design. So every little mistake is going to show up in your final product. So every time you're doing like a subtle thing, you want to think about what the end effect is going to be. So that's why it's important to keep things consistent. So if I draw things all the same size on all the same size pieces of paper, and I scan them at all the same size, so I have images that are exactly the same size, not even a little bit off. When I go to put something in the final InDesign, everything is going to be the same. And if it's not the same, then you're going to get images that are like all different sizes. And I know that doesn't sound like super deep, but it could be a nightmare. And the other thing that I would suggest is get in the habit of labeling everything consistently, like labeling it by, if you're doing something that's chronological in date, label it by date, label it in number, do it exactly the same way. And the more you do things that are really consistent and like everything's the same size, everything's in the right order, that's another important thing, is you want to get in the habit of thinking about order and pagination. And InDesign does the pagination for you, where I'm dropping it in like chronological order with one cover, inside cover, first page, second page, third page. But if I was assembling it by hand, it would not be 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be all over the place. And there's ways to do that if you're like photocopying a zine or a comic. But keeping things in the same order is really, really important. I would even keep, if you're like thinking about writing a book like over the course of like a semester, I would even keep the things you do in the order you do them. And so organization becomes really a big part, and it's like a lot to think about when it's kind of you're seeing the end game, and it becomes kind of like too much to handle. But if you break it down and get in the habit of doing it, then it becomes like a lot more manageable. So the other thing is you want to have everything be the same. When you go and drop stuff into InDesign, I'm not really going to get into like the details because I'm just kind of getting used to like using OBS software. So I'm just playing around with like sharing my screen. But one thing I will say is, if you have everything formatted exactly the same, your pages are the same size, and everything's like ordered in chronological order, there's a trick where I can go through and I can put one image in my InDesign file and I can paste it in all 100 pages, same image. And then I can go into my image files and I can select everything that's ordered from 1 to 100 for the book and that's at the same size at once, and I can go through and place them by clicking on each. It's basically like a placeholder image, each image, and if it's done correctly, it's a time-saving thing that will work, and it'll place each page chronologically at exactly the right size, and everything will come out the same. But if one little thing is off, where one of your page sizes is off, or something's not labeled correctly or in the right order, then it actually won't work very well, and it becomes like a time sink. So it's like a little bit of a shortcut. I would suggest, if you're going to do that, to try it out like 4 pages at a time. So that's a little bit complicated. So I'm basically using Photoshop to scan stuff and edit things, and InDesign to put stuff together, and then I'm drawing everything by hand and using a couple tricks to add color, and the end result is making something that is a self-published book. Trying to think what else I can go into today about that. That's kind of like the big picture, and if this was like a live class with students, I would ask, what are questions, so I can try and anticipate some of the questions. So this is like a little less than a year, although it's like I started this in March, and I basically did part 1 up until April, and then part 2 is up until like August, and then there's still part 3, which needs to be put together. For putting together like design files in InDesign, and the amount of time and like nitpickiness that needs to go into it, it's kind of like this gradual thing. Like it's kind of like almost like writing like in drafts, where at least when I do it, it's like I'm going through and I'm doing it, and then there's mistakes. 100% always there's mistakes, and then I'm going back through and I'm finding those mistakes, and then I'm going through again and finding the mistakes that I'm not seeing, but I'm anticipating being there. And the reason why I'm going through it so many times when I'm working in design is that any mistake that you can't see that's there on a screen, on a computer, is like painfully obvious when it's printed, and when you've like, committed to having something printed, and it's really hard to see. And so if you're like making a zine or self-publishing something, part of the DIY thing, if you're like, stapling it yourself and binding it, is that there's gonna be mistakes, and that's part of the charm. But when you're working with like design programs, you really want to like triple check something, and the advantage of doing it in a classroom setting is you could have like peer checking it, or me as the teacher checking it, because other people are going to be able to see the mistakes that you don't see. And that's kind of the other thing with just storytelling and image making and narrative making, is that there's going to be things that you don't see because you're in your own head and you know what you're doing, but other people are going to see it differently. And probably like one of the biggest things with writing a book or doing something that's like a graphic novel is just clarity. Like you want, something to be clear, like this is power lines with caution fence and a stick at Running Canyon. I'd say that's relatively legible as an image. And, it's not about necessarily with storytelling necessarily being like so brilliant with like the drawings. If you're doing something with images and writing together, it's about legibility, and that also has to do with like writing. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. That's kind of like the big picture on some of the steps that go into putting together a book. I may do like follow up about like, the process of like, how do I draw something and how do I ink, and like I'm using gouache to paint stuff and painting. But a lot of that stuff is just about having the tools and the direction and kind of like just like the technology of Photoshop and InDesign and like Adobe Suite programs. It's about like throwing yourself into it and figuring out how you can make something of it. Well, thanks so much for joining me. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.